This is your Nashville lawyer, Andrew Beasley, and I want to talk about Sam Bankman Fried. So, Mr. Fried has been in the news. He was convicted um, at jury trial just yesterday. And let's start out and read what the Department of Justice has to say about it. Uh, the Justice Department issued the following statement from Attorney General Merrick B. Garland on today's jury conviction in the trial of Sam Bankman Fried. Quote, Sam Bankman Fried thought that he was above the law. Today's verdict proves he was wrong. This case should send a clear message to anyone who tries to hide their crimes behind a shiny new thing they claim no one else is smart enough to understand. The Justice Department will hold you accountable. I am grateful to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York and the FBI for their outstanding work in bringing Mr. Bankman Fried to justice. Okay, so he was charged with 7 counts. He was charged with wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud on the customers of FTX and on the lenders to Alameda Research. And then he had a conspiracy to commit securities fraud on the investors to FTX and conspiracy to commit commodities fraud on customers at FTX in connection with purchases and sales of cryptocurrencies and swaps. And then finally, count 7, he had conspiracy to commit money laundering. This appears to be the most recent superseding indictment from August 14th, 2023, and the 7 counts that they went to jury trial on, and Mr. Bankman Fried has now been convicted. For any of us that practice in the federal courts, we kind of know instinctively that the conviction rates are extremely high. And so wire fraud is basically from the old mail fraud. It's a scheme to commit fraud using interstate commerce, whether that's by radio, wires, television, or, of course, the big one now is any type of internet communications. And that's what he's alleged to have done, and that's what he's been convicted of a jury by doing. But just so you understand, this is not, I would say the dollar amounts are out of the norm, but being convicted of wire fraud by a federal jury is not unusual at all. In fact, I looked up the actual statistics from Pew Research Center. As I say, any criminal defense lawyers like myself who practice in federal courts instinctively know how high the conviction rate is. But this is interesting to see Pew Research Center actually spell it out. So it says fewer than 1% of federal criminal defendants were acquitted in 2022. In fiscal year 2022, only 290 of 71,954 defendants in federal criminal cases, or about 0.4%, went to trial and were acquitted, according to Pew Research Center analysis of the latest available statistics from the federal judiciary. Another 1,379 went to trial and were found guilty, 1.9%. So you may look at these numbers and say, well, okay, so 290 plus 1379, you only had about 1,700 total even take their case to trial. So the fact that 290 were acquitted, hey, that's pretty good. That's closer to like 17% than to 0.4%. What you have to figure is, of the total of 1,700 that actually took their cases to trial in federal court, you have to believe those are the folks that believe they had the best chance of winning and that their lawyers had the best chance of winning. So even amongst that group, um, you only had uh, 290 acquittals and 1,379 convictions at trial. So the federal criminal process is very powerful. Um, it is very much favors the government, as the Pew Research Center actually put some numbers with this. As I say, this is something that federal criminal practitioners instinctively know, but that's the actual statistics. Now, I want to take a quick look at what he's facing. So, he's facing a maximum 110 years after the FTX trial. Here's what experts think how long he'll be behind bars. And this is from Forbes. And there's some very different opinions in here. Of course, they talk about Bernie Madoff, who was sentenced to 150 years. Here's a law school professor who doesn't think his sentence will be below 25 years. I tend to agree with that. Um, if we come down, they talk about Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos, who received an 11-year sentence out of a maximum of 80 years. It's really hard to predict the tea leaves here, but I do want to go over just a little bit of federal sentencing guidelines. So, because these are no longer mandatory, but they are calculated in every case, in every federal case before their sentencing, and I do believe they're relevant in the sentencing. So, you come here to the sentencing guidelines for your general financial crimes that are going to have a base offense level of 7. Okay, the defendant was convicted of an offense related to this guideline. That offense has a statutory maximum term of imprisonment, 20 years or more, which this does. So he's got a base offense of 7. You come over here to the sentencing guideline table and you say, okay, level 7, that's pretty good. He should do between 0 and 6 months. And because he's up here in zone A, that should all be on probation. I assume he doesn't have any prior criminal history, so 0 history points, although I don't know that for certain. And, but then you got to come back and you got to look at the amount of loss. The maximum, according to the sentencing guidelines, is more than $550 million. The scheme here with Sam Bankman Fried and FTX was in the billions of dollars. So you're going to add 30 points to his base level of 7. Now all of a sudden you've got 37, and there's a lot more that goes into federal sentencing than just the amount of loss. There's all kinds of enhancers and mitigators, but just on that base level alone, that would say 210 to 262 months. So the base level alone for one count is basically suggesting that he should serve 20 years or more in prison. There's a lot more. I'm sure there will be competing guidelines and sentencing memorandums from both the defense and the prosecution. But I agree with that. I agree with that assessment from Forbes. There was someone else who said, "Oh, it could be the judge could max him out, put him a lot closer to Bernie Madoff's 150 years." I don't know that's going to happen. I'll go out on a limb and say I'd be surprised by it. As I say, the guidelines are no longer mandatory, but they are calculated in every case. And so I think that's what he's looking at there. But clearly, the federal government, the Department of Justice, comes back with guilty on all charges yet again. That's what the statistics tell us to expect, and probably what the evidence supported in this case. So I appreciate your analysis. I appreciate you watching, and I'll talk to you again real soon.